I'm Sudhakar.
Sir, with your permission, I would like to initiate the program, sir.
Good evening, Sudhakar sir. Hello.
Hello, Sudhakar sir. Maybe some bandwidth problem, madam.
Okay.
Hello. You have to allow me, please allow me to video and audio both. Okay.
Yeah, sir.
I think you need to make sir the co-host. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. I made a co-host. Right.
Good evening, Sudhakar sir.
Good evening, madam. Namaste, madam.
Namaste, sir. Namaste, sir.
Madam, with your permission, I would like to start.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Department of English, Indian and other foreign languages, School of Applied Science and Humanities, VFSTR Vignan University, I would like to welcome to you all on the third day of our international workshop. As we have witnessed first day, Professor Venkat Reddy from EFLU, and the second day, Professor Rajagopal from EFLU. Third day, Professor Sudhakar Garu from EFLU. So I don't like to take much time to continue the proceedings. I would like to invite our head of the department, Professor Sharda Madam, to welcome the gathering and welcome the guest also.
Good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to our eminent speaker and resource person of the day, Professor Sudhakar sir. And I also extend my heartfelt thanks and welcome to all the participants for joining us this evening for this session in the research methodology workshop. So we are fortunate to have a erudite scholar, Professor Sudhakar sir, to give us a session on. Sir will be speaking on Introduction to ELT Theories and Models. We already had 2 sessions by eminent scholars who have introduced to you what doing research in ELT in particular and language studies in general is all about. So I'm sure you're all waiting for the 3rd session, and I hope that you will enjoy this session today. And just to brief our resource person about the department, sir, we are recently renamed as English and other foreign and Indian languages department. And we are aspiring to offer a number of minor courses in the coming years. So we are a department which is supported by 28 faculty members. And right now we are offering a number of courses for the students who are pursuing their engineering, law, pharmacy courses, as well as agricultural honors courses. And we are also having an MA program. And though the program was started only about 3 years back, and we have right now about 37 scholars working in various fields, language, literature, and some of them are working in cultural studies as well. So this is a little bit introduction for you about the department. So this workshop was actually originally planned as a part of the coursework for our research scholars. And then we thought that why not extend it to the larger public so that scholars and faculty members of other institutions can also enjoy the benefit of listening to these eminent speakers who are sharing their inputs during this research methodology workshop. So it is a privilege and honor for us to have Professor Sudhakar with us today, and I'm looking forward to listening to him. Thank you very much, sir. And I request Professor Mohanacharya to take over and continue with the proceedings.
Thank you, Professor Sharda, madam. As a protocol of our research methodology program, I request Mr. Amjad Khan, research scholar, has to present a brief profile of today's resource person, Professor Sudhakar Garu. Over to Mr. Amjad Khan. Amjad, unmute your mic. Right.
Yeah, good evening all. I'm Amjad, research scholar. I'm working under Shashirat Nagar sir here. Yeah, in the previous session, Professor Rajagopal sir shared his valuable insights by highlighting certain key questions of research methodology. Those were: what is the research question, the tool and procedure of data collection, what is meant by theory-based research, the technique and analysis of qualitative and quantitative research, and most importantly, aspects related to the research strategy. He said that making a clear research question is really important when you're doing serious study. He talked about how it's crucial to match the tools and the ways you collect information with what you want to find out. He helped researchers understand the ins and outs of both qualitative and quantitative methods. Professor Rajagopal sir also explained the idea of theory-based research, saying it's like having a strong foundation to understand your results better in a bigger picture. Using a reflective approach, he suggested a range of methods to follow the said points. Gave some practical guidelines to the new researchers of English literature, language, and language teaching. For instance, he stressed the aspect of reading well before starting your research. Choosing a topic of one's interest, most practically, he encouraged the adoption of self-imposed deadlines, recognizing their efficacy in managing the time efficiently and curbing procrastination. That's all about the previous session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amjad Khan. Now I request Dr. Annapurna Kiranmai to take over as the moderator, beginning with the introduction to our resource person, Professor Sudhakar sir, and then continue the program. Over to Annapurna Kiranmai.
Thank you, sir. Good evening to all. This is Kiranmai, Assistant Professor in English Department. I take this privilege of introducing an eminent academician, a beacon in the field of education, the distinguished Professor Sudhakar sir. Professor Sudhakar sir has an illustrious career marked by his excellence and dedication. His journey began as a lecturer at the College of Education, Andhra Mahila Sabha, Hyderabad in 1983. His passion for education and commitment to nurture young minds led him to ascend to the various leadership positions. Notably, he served as a professor, head and dean, and in the Faculty of Education at Usmania University, and also later in EFLU University. With the wealth of experience and expertise, Professor Sudhakar sir has become a respected figure in the academic community. Currently, he holds the prestigious position of being a member in the NCTE. And adding to this, he is an impressive portfolio. Professor Sudhakar sir is a visiting professor at the Central University of Karnataka. Beyond his professional accomplishment, Professor Sudhakar sir is recognized for his outstanding personality and uncovering support. In times of challenge, he is consistently been guiding force for all the fortunate people who are working with him. So I feel very prestigious once again to introduce Sudhakar sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, we all welcome you to VFSTR. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiran.
Yes, sir. Over to you, sir. Yes, sir.
Can I share?
Yes, sir. You can share the video. Yes, sir. You text.
Is my...
It is visible, sir.
Visible, yeah. Okay. Respected head of the department, Professor Sharda Madam, and distinguished faculty members, and dear students. Today, I'm going to read with you some of the important concepts and theories which most of us have studied during our post-graduation studies. I'll be taking insights from psychology of language studies primarily and try to address certain foundational theories which are relevant for English language teaching and learning. This is the task which was given to me. I'm not very comfortable with this topic because most of these concepts are well known to you. My readings are mostly in psycholinguistics. My students worked in the area of psycholinguistics and also in film studies and also a little bit of in the interface of phonology and education and early childhood education. These are some of the areas, and my central concerns are around philosophy of science and liberal education. But anyhow, with that background, I am entering into English language teaching and learning. And friends, this is one of the fascinating areas to understand the dynamics of teaching and learning a particular language. I'll be dealing today with certain fundamental, very preliminary ideas in the field of theoretical psychology, primarily. And maybe we will draw some insights from these theories to English language teaching and learning. In other words, we will be revisiting some of the theories which we have already learned. Maybe in the course of our revisiting, we may be learning some new insights. So please be cautious and try to ask questions if there are any. You can stop me at any time because I enjoy, having a dialogue with you. And this is the field which you are all, most of you are experts in this area. Friends, the question often comes to us is, what is language? It is very difficult to address what is language as a system of symbols, rules, which enables us to communicate. And primarily, most of the linguists try to understand language as a system of symbols. But it is not merely that. Behind each and every symbol, how it represents a part of reality or part of what it intends to represent. The symbolic representation itself, we need to problematize over a period of time in the course of our presentation. Friends, if you want to become an effective teacher in English language teaching and learning and research methodology around it, you need to be thorough with philosophy of language. When you talk about the philosophy of a language, you need to address issues related to ontology, reality, epistemological questions, and also certain axiological questions like how emotions are related with our learning and teaching. And mostly, if you read classical philosophy of language before 19th century, most of the philosophers were addressing how does language represents reality. I'm not going into the details of Bertrand Russell, Wittgenstein, and many other philosophers, but I just want to remind you that the philosophical discussions which we had till 18th century in the Western intellectual history, from Plato, Socrates to Descartes, Cartesian psychology and Cartesian, epistemology, all these ideas have given a fillip to our understanding of language. Friends, these ideas, each and every word, reality, knowledge, how language represents reality, or does language represent reality at all? And what is learning? These are some fundamental questions have been discussing in our department.
Hello. Mute your mic, please.
When you come to reality, I am little philosophical in the beginning, but I may go little. I try to weaken my philosophical tenor in my presentation over a period of time. But please bear with me for some time so that I can set the agenda for discussion today. Friends, we have multiple languages. But the question is, do multiple languages represent multiple worlds, multiple realities? Each language has its own construction of reality. A language constructs reality, constructs its own world. The world constructed by a particular language, speakers of a language, is it different from the world or reality constructed by other speakers? This is an important question which philosophers have been debating, even today. This is a very, very classical and very live question. Is reality multiple? Is reality just a linguistic construction or something else? Okay. Then the question comes, which are related to epistemological knowledge-related questions. Are we passive in constructing our world? Are we dynamic? Are we very active? Again, philosophers have divided into so many camps in addressing this particular question. Friends, these are all related to cognition, learning, and there are very fascinating questions which psycholinguists and philosophers of language have been trying to articulate and also address. And the important point here, my friends, is we need to understand what kind of question they're asking. These questions are very fundamental questions. These questions are very essential questions. Some of the questions are metaphysical in nature, which have lot of implications to the field of English language teaching. For example, friends, is cognition first or learning? Do we cognize the world first? Cognitive development takes first, or do we learn first and then cognize? This is also a classical question. This is a very interesting debate between two important psychologists you might have studied. I will come to that point in the course of presentation. Does cognition creates culture, or culture creates cognition? Okay. How does culture influence our cognition? This, sorry. This is an important question. It's not merely a dialectics which a play between cognition and culture, but also there are psychologists who strongly argue that cognition comes first, then culture. And there is another camp of psychologists who are arguing that culture comes first, then cognition. This is a very fundamental question. And the same way, does cognitive development leads to social development, or vice versa? Some of these questions, I think we need to ponder, we need to try to understand the implications of these questions. Friends, when you do research, you may be addressing certain fundamental questions in your thesis. As Professor Raj Gopal has rightly mentioned, most of the way we train in my university, we ask students, PhD students, to come with some essential questions, some important questions which they can address. And these are all related. When student comes with a meaningful question in the domain of knowledge itself, in English language, that entire corpus of knowledge, how mature that question is, that we try to debate and judge. So most of you, those who have did PhD, you are very well aware of what kind of questions you have raised in the thesis and how you have addressed them. And those who are going to do research, for them, it is necessary to articulate questions, to find important questions which they can address. The questions of this type may be, which should generate knowledge in the field of English language teaching. The questions which are very common today in English language literature. Does children learn more from peers or adults during their childhood? And you might have studied language versus thought. Does language influence thought, or thought determines language? You might have studied Saussure-Wolf hypothesis, which is a very famous hypothesis, which is, grappled by many language philosophers. And when you say that a particular language constructs a reality, so whose construction is a legitimate construction? Again, this is an important question. You see, when you say Oxford and Cambridge University, when they're constructing, okay, this is the way English language should be taught. When they're prescribing certain things, the question here is only that model legitimate, or do we have other legitimate models? So those who are in power, how do they construct reality, and how do they generate knowledge? Maybe some important publishers in this present day, like Pearson, Springer, Bloomsbury. There are many publishers which are very, very, have very strong market. And the way they construct the language, the way they, their own discourses, how it happens, do you think that is the only legitimate way of looking at? I'm just taking, the idea of power and how it is related to the knowledge, which mostly you might have studied in postmodern literature, and especially Foucault and, post-structural discourse. Friends, I don't go into very fundamental aspects like what is language. Most of you are aware of what is language. There are a number of definitions of language. People from different disciplines within the language studies try to look at language from their perspective. Semioticans, the way of looking at language is different. Maybe psycholinguists' way of different. And applied linguistics people may look at differently. But by and large, when you talk about language, there are certain properties of language, like language is communicative, language, there is arbitrariness, there is a structure in it, it is generative, and language is dynamic, whatnot. We have a lot of properties like this. And when you do language studies, your level of analysis may be at the level of phonetics or phonemes, words, sentences, or a text, depending on the area of interest. But organically, all these aspects are related. When you talk about a discourse in language, how these things are related organically, the textual and the morphic, all these aspects, linguistic and also non-linguistic aspects, how do play a role in shaping and constructing our idea of language. Friends, there are certain classical questions which are related to language acquisition, how language is acquired or learned. This is a very important question, and people are trying to distinguish between language acquisition and language learning. How do they do that? And how language representation, how are symbols of language represented in memory? Because there is a lot of research going on in cognitive, neurocognitive sciences, and also cognitive psychology, and how symbols are represented in our memory. And how do we retrieve this memory? There's a lot of research, which people are doing in that area, very potential area, which is the interface of cognitive science and psycholinguistics, that part of it. And language processing, what factors influence the processing of language? This is very important aspects which most of the social applied linguists try to study. How acquisition, representation, and processing, okay, how do you acquire, how do you represent in your mind, and how do you process in symbols in your mind, for example? These are all this kind of complex relationships, how this acquisition leads to a set of representation and the language use in the processing of these representations. Some of these things we need to study. We need to think about it. Friends, let me sincerely confess that nothing is original which I am speaking from my side. These are all ideas which I have borrowed from the philosophers, psychologists, linguists, and language pundits, so many people, which I have collected and I am presenting before you. So let us have a fruitful discussion on some of these very, very potential ideas. I just go back to a little bit of linguistics and psychology history, just to refresh our mind. Friends, you might have read that between 1940s and 50s, even to a certain extent, even after 1950s, a psychology which is dominated by behaviorism. We have Skinner, Pavlov, Skinner. You might have studied all these things in your language studies. That was the dominating paradigm theory during 1940s and 50s. I will come to the point what is behaviorism and how it is related to language learning and teaching. At the same time, the contemporary times of 1940s and 50s, there was also emergence of structural linguistics. That part also we need to understand. So what I'm saying is, parallelly, there were two intellectual diversions or intellectual streams which flourished in the history. One as a behaviorism, which is popularly known as positivism in social sciences, and also structural linguistics in language sciences. In 1960s, you find a sustainable, very consistent criticism on behaviorism, which led to a cognitive psychology or cognitive science. Today we call it as a cognitive science. And the same ways, people who were dissatisfied with structural linguistics have come out with an alternative way of looking at, language, a totally different way of looking at language, that is transformational and generative school of language studies. Now I'm coming to the point. These things you might have studied already, but just to refresh your mind, behaviorism as a school of thought, which has entered into English language teaching for a long time, even it is sustained. Its domination is still, you find in most of the departments across the world. It focused only on publicly observable behaviors. What you utter, what you say, what you perform. Okay? This is what behaviorists have taken into consideration. According to them, it's not possible to explore what is happening in the mind or in the brain. So let us not bother about inside what is happening, but let us take the corpus of domain of knowledge or domain which is uttered by the speakers, okay, their expressions, and that part of the language we need to consider for our scientific research. This kind of studies mostly you will find in the universities across the globe, and which are impressed by behaviorist school of psychology. And by and large, the same time, structural linguistics also arguing that only observable linguistic behaviors can be studied. Language could be dismantled. You can bifurcate the language into small pieces and units and describe all the units in a scientific manner, just like a nuclear scientist does it, matter how he divides into, some atoms and subatomic particles. Then you can try to synthesize. That is the way which structural linguistics were conceptualizing the language studies. So friends, try to see the parallels between these two. For behaviorists, intuition, for example, it's not important. Memory, let us not study about it. Thinking, don't do too much of studies on thinking or any other mental processes. These are all systematically ignored by behavioristic, school of philosophy, language studies. In the same way, structural linguistics also, notions such as meaning or thought were completely ignored. Please try to see the parallels between these two, because 40s and 50s, by and large, the same kind of ideology which is rooted in behaviorism and structural linguistics, was dominating the field of English language research. This is what I want to say here. Friends, when you talk about behaviorism, learning a behavior through, I don't go into the details because most of you are aware of how conditioning, when you condition an organism to respond in a desired ways to stimuli, practice, drilling, according to them, these strategies are very important for learning. So English language teachers across were giving importance to practice, drilling, workbooks, whatnot, blah, blah, blah. And structural linguistics for them, learning language, is also a conditioning learners to make the right connection between stimuli and the desired responses. They also thought that drilling in the language classroom was always a desirable method. You might have studied Skinner's positive and negative, punishments and, reinforcement. How do they play a role in learning? And also in structural linguistics, positive and negative reinforcement play a significant role in language learning. Friends, from that, there is a departure now in 1960s. Philosophers of language, researchers in language, who were dissatisfied with these two paradigms, which were dominating the field of research, they started their focus on meaning, understanding meaning, and knowing how important they are. You see? Now, slowly, what is happening in the mind or what is happening in the brain, that has become an important part of study. And in the same way, a new linguistics, transformational generative linguistics, they broke away from structuralists because structuralists insisted on just observable language, only a performance kind of language performance, then which they also rejected that kind of thing and has come out with an alternate way of looking at. And linguistics goes beyond mere description of the surface structure of language and what is happening in the learner's mind. That has become an important point. And cognitive psychologists also, sought to discover underlying motivation, deeper structures of human behavior. It's now totally a different way of looking at human mind. Whereas behaviorists and structural linguistics totally neglected that area of understanding human brain and human mind. Okay. Actually, human mind was studied from Plato, Socrates, from that Western legacy, total legacy, intellectual, analytical legacy, that has been sidelined by behaviorist and structural linguistics for a long time. Cognitive psychology, they have not focused on mechanical stimulus-response connections, which behaviorists were talking about, but they were also focusing on principles of how, in learning, how a learner organizes, okay, how a learner plans, how all these things function, there are different kind of functionings, So their focus, symbolic representation, for example, has become an important part in the cognitive psychology. In the same way, transformational generative linguistics, studying competence, the competence reveals the hidden level of meaning and thought that deep structure generates the observable performance. You see, when a learner is speaking something, behind that utterance, there's a competence, okay? A mental competence, a cognitive competence. That we will come to the point when we study a particular Chomskyan language theories. So language basically is a species specific, and most of the generative linguists like Chomsky believed that language is innate and human beings are born to learn language. You see, there are a couple of things which are very fascinating here and which we will discuss during my Chomskyan presentation. Friends, then, from cognitive psychology, when cognitive psychology was addressing all these things, it has become much more mature in its approach in understanding language learning. And a new way of looking at, a new theoretical school has emerged. And that new theoretical school, we call it as Constructivism. And Constructivism, people, when they started conceptualizing some important aspects in Constructivism, different forms of Constructivism got manifested in the history after 1980s. For example, cognitive constructivism and social constructivism and cognitive social constructivism. There are different varieties. Now people say there are more than 30 prominent schools of constructivism itself in the history. When you talk about constructivism, it involves the integration of linguistic, psychological, sociological, all theoretical paradigms. And they emphasize on the learner. Learner is an active constructor of knowledge. Okay. Cognitive constructivism, this I will be emphasizing in other slides also, emphasizes the role of the learner in constructing his or her own representation of reality. Okay. And this is what we are all constructivists in one sense. Cognitively, we construct reality, the world which we experience every day. Constructivism also talks about that learners transform complex information to make meaning. Okay. So you need to make students very active, as an active participant in learning. How do you do that? How do you make students very dynamic? That is very big challenge. It's not merely importing, some external stimuli, importing knowledge, but other psychologists are talking about how do you develop the responsibility for learning in the student, self-regulations, motivation. There are some of the aspects which psychologists have been talking about to make learner much more active and participant. Piaget, you might have heard about Swiss psychologist Piaget, who argues that learning is a developmental process. I will come to Piaget after a couple of slides. That involves change, self-generation, and construction, each building on prior experiences. Learning itself is a developmental linear process. This is what Piaget has been, was conceptualizing. This was, some psychologists were very critical about Piagetian position, and there was a live debate between Piaget and many other philosophers in psychology, and books were published. Many books were published on that kind of debates. Friends, the second part of constructivism is social constructivism. Let me first differentiate between cognitive constructivism and social constructivism. Cognitive constructivism gives emphasis to the mind, cognition. Okay. So that is the reason cognitive constructivism, that's the reason we say cognitive constructivism, because it is giving importance to the mind. Whereas social constructivism, they also argue that learner constructs knowledge, but social relations, the context, their interactions with the other human beings, the world around, that is important. And that is the primary aspect in constructing the learner's image and reality. Now you see there are two diverse philosophical positions in language learning. You can see one position is arguing that mind is the primary in constructing reality, and the other aspects, social aspects, are secondary. But whereas social constructivism arguing that, social interaction, society, values, the other aspects are very important than the mind. Mind is secondary. Friends, here, language learning is a result of thinking and meaning making that is socially constructed and emerges out of social interaction with the environment. This is what most of the social constructivists talk about. But sometimes we, so many questions to our mind, when we read learning theories and also different theories in English language teaching and learning. Which is the best theory? There are so many theories. Which theory I should adopt? Dear researchers, please realize that every theory has some insight. And you need to explore multiple theories, multiple ways of looking at the world, okay? And try to synthesize, try to, draw insights which are relevant to your questions, which you are going to address in your thesis, okay? So this is a very important aspect for a researcher. I'll just go to this language development. When you talk about language development, primarily, there are 3-4 dimensions which are important, biological maturation, neural development, these are very important issues in language development. And also how the language development also influences biological maturation, our thinking, our cognition. This is a two-way process. And when you take the cognitive development, again, cognitive development and maturation, two-way process, and language development. And try to see, the entire dynamics here, how the arrows are represented. By and large, this is a complex nexus. How the linguistic environment, how it is influencing cognitive development and also biological maturation and neural development. When you are teaching in a formal setup in a school, when you teach language, how does it influence or it determines child's cognitive development and also biological development. So nothing is in isolation. Everything is connected. Every human action is related to some other action. So please realize this. With this, when you talk about learning language, some people say it is like a black box. How do children learn a language, mother tongue? Or how do children learn a second language or a foreign language? Still, we do not know. There are stories and stories, theories and theories. What is happening inside, this inside box. Cognitive psychologists are coming with certain alternatives, explanations, and neuropsychologists are coming with some other explanations. There are multiple disciplinarians now. When you read research papers on the internet, sometimes, we get confused, the kind of scholarship which flows from different, disciplines. That's what, fascinates us in one way, because clarity and intellectual thoughts comes out of that kind of confusion and also complexity. Friends, we'll go back to behaviorism to little extent. Most of you have studied classical conditioning of Pavlov's dogs experiments. I'm not going to repeat these things because that itself is a very big subject, and most of you studied already. And also Skinner's vision boxes and how he came out with operant conditioning. And by and large, behaviorism, as I mentioned, focused only on observable behaviors. That's why behaviorists always talk about observation and measurement. You see? So whatever you observe, that observed things have to be translatable, and the translatable aspects need to be measurable. No, that is the science. That is the way how the behaviorist science moves. That you need to understand. Quantification towards quantification. Learning is primarily explained in terms of imitation, practice, reinforcement, and habit formation. No doubt, all these aspects are very important in learning. But you cannot reduce learning only to imitation, only to habit formation, only to reinforcement. This is very important, because learning is much more a comprehensive, organic, semiotic space. It's a very powerful space. When you talk about behaviorism, its influence on second and foreign language teaching between 1940s and 70s is tremendous. And audiolingual method, even in my university, English and Foreign Language University, there was a department called Radio TV department. For a long time, they used to emphasize on the behavioristic psychological methods and audiolingual methods of second language teaching. And this you might have seen, you might have experienced. Old people like me, we know that, how that was dominating in the university departments. And even still today, I see most of the engineering colleges across the country, they have established language labs. And what they do? Practice, imitation, habit formation. This is all a kind of behavioristic psychology. We are nurturing our learners and also faculty. Nothing wrong in it, but if you become fetishized, if you think that that is the only thing we should do, that is a problem. Friends, actually, behaviorism has taken ideas from John Locke. John Locke, an English philosopher, you might have heard about him, who was assuming that this human mind is, our child's mind is like a tabula rasa, the clean slate. Okay, that child fills the information, when child interacts with the world, in the external world becomes a stimuli, and that stimuli enters into the human mind, and the information goes into the mind through sensory organs, and the child forms an idea about the world. So that kind of philosophical explanation, behind behaviorism, which Pavlov, Skinner have borrowed from John Locke, emphasized on training, drilling, repetition, and by and large, some of these things which most of you are aware of. But what is important here is we need to observe. They also recognize that there is something innate which is making responsible for organizing. This is also there, but they have not given that importance to that, but they recognize that part of it. Because otherwise there is no meaning, When so many ideas are coming into our mind, how the mind is organizing this, that means mind has some kind of innate ability. So try to remember this. Behaviorists recognized this, but they have not given any importance to this point. That's why, behaviorists. There is one more aspect which we need to understand, that students memorize the dialogues, sentence patterns by heart. This is what people used to do. And learning a language is a process of habit formation. Habits of learning language 1, according to mostly the behavioristic kind of schools, will surely interfere with the new habits of L2 that the learner wants to form. This is a contrast to hypothesis, well known in the literature. Most of you might have studied this. So how our own language, our mother tongue, how does it influence in learning English language? This is a contrast to hypothesis which was addressed by many behavioristic psychologists. And rewards and punishments, responsibility for student learning rests totally on the teacher, and they emphasize on lecture-based, highly structured kind of learning. And as I mentioned, that what is happening in the mind that they have not considered at all. And student learning has become so passive because teacher-centric environment. And knowledge itself, for them, it is given in absolute. This is the problem, Only when you give question to students the teacher was expecting same kind of answer from all the students. This is the danger. Because when you give a creative question, a critical question, okay, students try to address that question from their own experiences. This is what we have in the way when we are writing school textbooks. That's because I am also part of this writing of school textbooks for a long time. So we have given importance to how each and every student, how to tap their original potential, come out with their own ideas. But this was not the case with behavioristic school textbooks. And programmed instruction, which was very popular during 50s and 60s, which you all know, mathematics, for example. There is a lot of literature which has come, and this most of you are aware of. That was the educational technology, classical old educational technology, in English language teaching. Friends, very interesting and contemporary theory, which most of you got fascinated with this, I am sure about it, is Noam Chomsky's language theories, which is popularly known as government binding theory. According to Chomsky, there is some potential in everybody's mind or everybody's brain. That potential, which you may call it as, it is a genetically transmitted potential which has been inherited from our ancestors to us, from our fathers, forefathers, whatnot, that potential, that consciousness, that potential is known as, by Chomsky and others, language acquisition device, LAD. You see, what Chomsky is trying to look at. Chomsky is trying to look at, Chomsky is believing that there is something potential, innate, okay? And that innate potential is regulating everything. That innate potential has certain principles, endowed with certain principles and certain parameters, okay? There are people who go with, Chomsky, for a long time, and a new way of looking at the language. It is a big jolt on behavioristic school of psychology, which was believing that language learning is external. From external stimuli, only processing takes place, that kind of thing. But here, it's a different way of looking at consciousness, that's potential. And you have, for example, in a strong innativism, if you believe, there are structures and mechanisms enabling language acquisition are predetermined. This is very, very strong innativist idea some people express. knowledge is in the form of linguistic universals. Please try to understand this word. There are universal linguistic principles which are endowed, which are there in language acquisition device. That is the reason children can learn n number of languages before they attain age 7. Okay. These are very important departure, from the classical theories of language. And for them, this innativist perspective, which is also one form of essentialist perspective, because there is an essence in human mind. There's a human being, that essence is in the mind. Humans are born with innate knowledge of the principles of universal grammar. Universal grammar allows all children to acquire the language of their environment during a critical period of their development. Maybe critical period may be 7 years, or maybe 6 years, or some, depending on different geographies, maybe 8 years. Once the child attains the critical period, that usually allows him to learn a number of languages. And also, the nativist mentalist approach, it assumes that is actively engaged in creating and constructing his own personal grammar. Everyone has their own personal grammar. Language is acquired in natural settings, not necessarily for conditioning. How the child learns a mother tongue, it is a natural way of learning. So nurturing environment in secondary because of innate ability to learn a particular language, because we have the principles, universal principles of language, universal grammar. So that's a very important aspect which we need to study. Researchers again divided within the innativist perspective, and there are so many schools within Chomsky tradition itself. The classical grammarians and modern grammarians, and also the postmodern grammarians. There are a number of schools of language studies here. And primarily the applicability of universal grammar to second language acquisition. Some people strongly believe that universal grammar provides an adequate explanation only for first language, but not for the second language acquisition. There are some people who do that. For example, universal grammar is equally available to second language learners as it was for first language learners. This is one position. And another position is universal grammar has been altered. It is not the same after acquiring language 1. Once you learn a mother tongue, then your potential has undergone a lot of change. Okay? Your potential, that consciousness, LED consciousness has become, much more matured, So there are theories. Some people believe in that. There are a lot of discussions, research papers, and people like you are all younger scholars. You should start reading seriously. You may be reading. I'm sorry for saying that, but very fascinating questions for doing your research are there available in this particular tradition also. You see, when you talk about behaviorism, behaviorist schools, though still it is dominating, you can also study how the behaviorism is still dominating the English language teaching and learning. That will be a good topic for your research study. For them, knowledge is already stored in the form of symbols. When you say what are Newton laws, you immediately utter Newton laws. That means the Newton laws in the symbolic form, they are already there in your memory. That's what behaviorists have believed. Learning is a process of connecting symbols in a meaningful, memorable way. This is what cognitivists are talking about. these symbols, okay, how a learner connects the symbols. This connection is a meaningful way of connecting. Okay. When a meaning is generated, then it is retained in the memory. This is very important part of it. It is retained in the memory itself. So that kind of symbol connections, which in the cognitive psychology have studied, that's why the famous book written by Jean Piaget, Genetic Epistemology, which is a very important classic text. How this is, in one way, Jean Piaget is also close to, nativist and essentialist kind of tradition, and where he talks about the schema, assimilation, accommodation, some of these important concepts. With that, he tried to explain that language is developmental. There is how a language development takes place. There are different milestones of language development. Beautifully, people explain with the Piagetian theoretical model. That's a very important model, which most of you are aware of. Because for them, language acquisition is a continuous process of self-construction. Okay. And child tries to invent and reinvent always, interacts and organizes. Okay. The schema. What is a schema? Schema is a cognitive framework which child formulates over a period of time. And how this cognitive schema, new information gets assimilated into that, and how the cognitive schema gets adapted to new environment. This is wonderful explanations of Jean Piaget to understand language learning. So friends, please try to read once again, all these concepts, taking language learning into consideration. These are all very important aspects, which is not just a lot, which Jean Piaget was talking about genetic knowledge, or when he was talking about different kinds of knowledge, physical knowledge, logico-mathematical knowledge, social-cultural knowledge. And some of these ideas were taken by, our multiple intelligence theories that most of you are aware of. Friends, which Piaget has talked about 4 stages of development. I am not going into the details of this, but the idea is that for Piaget, cognition is important. Mind is important. Okay. Mind is a source for learning. This is what Piaget has talking about, that we need to understand. And if you adopt, cognitivism in classroom, you may try to adopt different strategies in, teaching and learning English language. I'm not going into this particular slide, how to develop curiosity and scaffolding and all these things. And some people, are very critical about Piagetian theories. And they say that like behaviorism, even Piagetian cognitive constructivism also assumes knowledge is given and absolute. No, that's very important to figure it out. Please underline that knowledge is given and absolute, even for cognitive constructivism of Piagetian version. And how the knowledge today in post-structuralist language, we talk about knowledges, not just knowledge. There are different forms of knowledge. Okay. And when you talk about input, process, and output model, this is little bit, most of the information processing theories of language learning, which is derived logically from cognitive constructivism. This kind of output modeling, they're mostly mechanistic and also deterministic. This is just like a factory model. There are inputs and you process, there's an output. So that way, behaviorism is also sharing certain assumptions with cognitive constructivism. Because cognitive constructivism does not account enough for individuality. Okay. And also very little emphasis on affective characteristics, which is very important, which you might have studied in when you have studied Stephen Krashen and Daniel Goleman and many others who talked about the importance of emotions in learning. Friends, I don't know. The time is okay. Let me talk about a little bit on social learning theory, which talks about which is given by Bandura and others. Learning takes place through observation and sensorial experiences. That's also a very important part, which they talk about collaborative learning, modeling, responses and expectations, opportunities to observe experts and others. And there are many critiques of social learning theory, because social learning theory also does not take into account individuality, context, and experience as mediating factors. And it suggests students to learn best as passive receivers and sensory stimuli. And emotion and motivation are not considered at all the same way. So by and large, this social learning theory of Bandura or cognitive constructivism of Piaget, though they have very potential ideas, but to certain extent, in certain ways, they are also weak in the theorizing certain things. And friends, there is very important theory which most of us, all of us got impressed with Lev Vygotsky. Vygotsky, my students and my university are very, very fascinated with this particular linguistic scholar, a Russian scholar. Very young age, he died, unfortunately, and most of his works were published in Russian language. Even I came to know that, a couple of months ago, some of his writings were discovered in Russia, and they are going to publish in English, translate in English. And some of the important work of Vygotsky were published in after 1970s in United States, and people got in touch with his intellectual ideas, and just like a fire, it has gone to many departments of English language and philosophy departments, and Vygotsky made a strong impact on pedagogy and also on different disciplines. Let us, when you talk about Vygotsky, cognitive development, Vygotsky says that there is a difference between Vygotsky and Piaget. Try to capture this, Vygotsky's argument is, you see, learning, we are all learning beings, okay? Learning leads to cognitive development, but not cognitive development to learning. Whereas cognitive psychologists like Piaget believed that cognition leads to learning. Cognition precedes learning for Piaget. For Vygotsky, learning precedes cognition. This is a very beautiful way of explaining, language learning. Friends, how this learning occurs, it's a very fascinating area in itself, because you need to learn a lot from these psychological theories. How, a child, when he's interacting with a more knowledgeable person like adults, parents, teachers, how he tries to internalize, learn, in that interaction. This is a very important points which most of you might have studied. Adults mostly help children, parents help children in everyday conversation at home, and teachers also do the same kind of thing in the school, and other peer, the child's friends and community, they all support the child, and that is the way child learns. So this is a kind of community learning which happens, and so child, when he are actively engaged in such kind of learning process, then there is some kind of development, mental development or cognitive development which takes place. Friends, there are two things here which we need to understand. Every child, when he interacting with others, when he's learning, okay, is one thing. He learns the words, he learns the language, speech and everything. But also child talks, he's not just conversing with others, but after conversing with other, child talks to himself or herself. This happens with every child, every person, every human being, even you and me. As adults, it is happening. Most of us, we talk to ourselves. And that is important aspect, that self-language, talking to one's own self. First, child is talking to, there's an interconnection between the others and the child. But after that, from learning from that, then child is talking to himself or herself. It has become intra. So that is the way how things are moving. That actually gives a fillip to child's learning and development, cognitive development. So how the language, the private language, the language of self, the language of with others. This is a very interesting area which you need to study, and you can identify very interesting concepts in that area. So friends, now it is 7:49. I try to close it. So Constructivism, also they have some critiques. There are so many critiques of social constructivism, saying that there's a lot of emphasis. For example, nowadays there are hardcore neurocognitive psychologists, who are giving much importance to the neurological behavior. How do neurons, play a role in constructing our world, by and large. There are a lot of literature which is coming to this area. I request all of you to go through the new literature in neuropsychology, in the interface of language and neuropsychology. Friends, most of you are aware that Howard Gardner, fortunately, I met him in 1994. He was sitting in Harvard University in a small room, and he was working on a project called Project Zero that time. And that time he was not very popular, but somebody directed me to meet Gardner. Just like that, casually I went to his room, and he gave a lot of books and also his Project Zero papers to me to read, and he shared some of his things. But I was meeting so many professors, then one of them was Gardner. But when I came to India, after some years, I was told that Gardner is a great person who did a lot of work. You see, mostly, his work has become very, very influential in the field of language teaching. But many psychologists and hardcore linguists don't agree with Gardner, because Gardner failed in one way to demonstrate that there are specific areas in the brain which can be discovered. Specific areas for verbal, linguistic, visual, spatial, logico-mathematical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, naturalist, whatnot. Some of these intelligences which Gardner is talking about. Gardner's definition of intelligence itself is very, it's not so scientific in one way. I don't know what is science. That itself is a questionable always. But anyhow, a beautiful book was published with the title Gardner Under Fire, and where many critics published their papers and argued against Gardner. And the last chapter, where Gardner answered all these critiques and came out with his own account of a multiple intelligence theory. And friends, don't study multiple intelligence theory religiously, but in a critical way, try to learn multiple intelligence theory. And because it has got a lot of pedagogical implications, very strong pedagogical implications, which, because learning is not just a cognitive process. Learning is an artistic process. Learning is a musical process. Learning is an aesthetic process. Learning is an emotional process. Learning is a spiritual process. Whatnot. There are so many aspects which are there in learning itself. That's why learning itself is a black box to me. Friends, when you move from multiple intelligence theory, you have brain-based learning, which has become very popular, and because there are a lot of research funding for this kind of research in United States and many other European countries, and people are doing a lot of work because today, language learning specialists have been interacting with experts in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and expert systems, whatnot, different areas of the technology, and it is revealing some important aspects about human brain, how human brains function, how in human neurons, how do they behave in different contexts. I must sincerely confess that my knowledge is not, my knowledge is big zero in this. I am just flashing you that some of the processes, because brain is so creative, so fascinating, that it does multiple operations, multiple functions simultaneously. The visual learning, for example, how the vision has become an important subject today in learning process. For example, when you talk about concept map and all these things, when people are talking about, behind that, there is a lot of theory, very interesting theory, theories which are emerging now, in visual sciences, visual neurosciences, that is a part of it. And for example, emotions in learning, which Krashen also talks about it. And I am not going into all the details of Krashen's theory, but how emotions are embedded in our learning process, and how emotions, where do they lie in human brain, in the neurons. This is a wonderful study. One of our famous neuroscientists, Venkat Raman, I think, Ramachandran, for example, some of them, they are working wonderful work in that area. And please go through the latest literature in that. And I hope all of you, take this journey, intellectual journey, very seriously, with a lot of passion and lot of things. And because there's a purpose behind your journey, that you need to transform our institutions of learning, give a lot of theory back, epistemology back, our knowledge back to transform our institutions of learning. I wish you all the best, and stop it here. Thank you very much. And I must confess that nothing is my original. Everything which I have borrowed from the psychologists and linguists, and that I have presented here. Thank you very much. I must thank Professor Sharda Madam and Dr. Kiranmai for giving me this great opportunity to be, before all of you in the Vigyan University. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It is wonderful. It is awesome, and it is thought-provoking.
Thank you, sir.
And it is highly potential for all our research scholars. Dear participants, now it is open for you all. If you want any interaction or any questions or any clarifications or suggestions, you are welcome now. You can unmute yourself and then ask questions. First, introduce yourself and then ask questions, sir. Anyone? If possible, kindly share the PPT with us. Now recording is there. Tomorrow in our WhatsApp group, we will share the recording. By that, you can take the PPT also.
Sure, sir. I'll send it to you, sir. Now, after Professor Rajgopal's presentation and Professor Venkatreddy's presentation, most of you might be feeling that I have not spoken well.
But no, not like things, sir. It is quietly new.
Hello.
And something.
I am Dr. Sasikiran.
They are my.
Hello.
Yeah,
hello,
madam.
Sir.
Madam.
I am Dr. Sasikiran, sir, from Geetham University.
Yes, ma'am.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, madam. Yes,
hello.
Yes, madam. You're audible, madam.
Sir, your presentation is very nice. We went to the days of our PGCT, PGDT, completing those courses.
Madam.
Almost all, it's a kind of revision for me. My query is two generalized question actually. Like learners are there and theories are there. Okay. And theories go on modified sometimes, added sometimes. They are dynamic. Learners are also, in spite of their limitations, very dynamic. And can we always understand the learner's behavior or learner's set of interest and all by going through a set of principles and theories instead of one or so? How can I observe my learners with the background of these theories actually?
It is a very, very pertinent question you're asking. I may not address it totally, but we have different theories about how child learns. As you rightly said, these theories have been undergoing change.
Yes, sir.
It's always, something modified, something added, something, it is, theories are getting transformed into new ways of looking at. You are right, absolutely right. And also learner, the times when I learned in my school and the children who are learning today, the generation, totally different kind of generation,
Yes, sir.
And these theories, what you're asking is, are they adequate to capture the present day child?
Yes, sir.
This
exactly.
is an important question, very important question. But my partial answer is that, you see, most of the theories have some good insights.
Sure.
These insights are universal in nature,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Some of these insights we need to bring in trying to understand the contemporary or the present generation learner.
Yes, sir.
There is a gap between a theory and the reality,
Yes, sir.
how a child learns. This gap, it's very difficult to have a one-to-one kind of correspondence. But
yes, sir.
With our intellectual history and tradition and the kind of research we are doing, we need to go close to the child, understanding the child. That is an effort. That is a journey. We may not.
Yes, sir.
This thing. That is my answer, madam. I don't know.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Good evening, sir. May I ask a question? Sir, thank you so much for this wonderful lecture today.
Introduce yourself, madam.
Sir, I'm Dr. Geeta Rai from Delhi University. And we met, you had come as one of the experts in the foundation stage in NEP, sir, in our university, if you remember.
Thanks, madam.
Just recently, yes, sir. Sir, you are very humble that you were saying that your lecture is not good enough, but I think it was more detailed, and we did brush up whatever we have studied earlier. And I would like to ask you one question that although we talk about so many theories and all, but still while observing the lesson plan, we see that we are still, following the behavioristic approach of imitation and all. That constructivism doesn't come in and the socio-linguistic aspect is missing from the class.
Correct.
Right, sir. So, how can we help learners construct their knowledge when the teachers don't have the autonomy? They have to follow the worksheets that has been given to them and the prescribed syllabus, which is examination oriented. So, in that case, how is language taught? In fact, how it should be caught?
Absolutely, madam. Absolutely. I also totally agree with you in in recognizing this particular challenge. This is a very big challenge to all of us. The kind of technology which is pouring in, and also the dominant institutions like Cambridge University Press and English language testing agencies across the globe, in the Europe, and how they have entered into India and manufactured the way of looking at English language teaching. This needs to be handled properly because we have not explored till now, how the native Indian knowledge systems perspective, how a language learning, how do they, what kind of scholarship has gone into this, and we have not fully explored including Panini grammar or certain intellectual traditions within the linguistic part of Indian knowledge systems. We have not done that. We are moving totally with the dominant technology that is the lesson planning kind of thing, which is more positivistic and also behavioristic. And because we have certain pragmatic concerns, we want to measure, we want to observe. These are the things which that rationality dominates the institutions. So unless we, critique that rationality, that a kind of modernist or neoliberal kind of rationality, if we don't critique that, it's not possible to explore the other ways of looking at, which you have rightly pointed out, that, child learns naturally, how to bring that natural environment, how to model that in the classrooms. For that, you also said about teacher autonomy, how it is linked with that. So I totally agree with you, madam. You have touched a very important point in our practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks, ma'am.
Hello, Sandeep Yadav.
You can write down your questions in chat box also. We can read out for you. Please write it down.
Sandeep Yadav unmute, and then I don't know whether he's asking any question or. It is full of explanation and there is no scope for getting any doubts. Kiranmai, madam?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, true.
Sir, I would like to ask one question to sir.
Madam, introduce yourself, madam, first.
I am Rima Chakravarti from VFSTR. I am a faculty here. I'm working here. I have been working here for the past 2 years. Sir, actually, I am not at all an expert in linguistics, so I'm sorry if my question sounds a bit naive, but I just wanted to know a bit about it, and it is somewhat connected to Geeta ma'am's question. The previous question. actually, sir, this point of Piaget, that learning itself is a developmental linear process. This aspect has stuck me a bit because, like in the current times, when digital, when students are living in a digital world, how are they learning? Like the question is that whether we teachers means what is the importance of teachers in the present context, in this context, whether a student, like when the students are so much impacted by the digital world. So and is this has this remained linear anymore, or has it become dynamic? That is another question that has come to my mind.
Very interesting question, madam. Very interesting question. See, when you talk about the present day children, the kind of mobile technology which is impacting on them and the way they are learning, this is a totally different way of look, a new reality which is emerging today in across the world. Okay, how the mobile technology is constructing children's desires and children's consciousness and all these things. But we are grappling with the old concepts like learning. Actually, learner, the word learner itself is very damaging word. It's a very mechanical word. Actually, in Indian tradition, in the Indian ethos, if you look at, we don't have that kind of word learner. You know, when you say vidyarthi, student, in English, the connotation, the meaning is totally different. Okay. But unfortunately, the new technologies have reduced everything, child as a learner. This kind of reductionism, there is a politics in it, which we need to recognize. And also teacher, unfortunately, the new market is saying that teacher is just like a facilitator. This is also very wrong.
Yes, sir.
Not just a facilitator. Teacher is, guru. Guru is a different kind of connotation again in Indian tradition. Okay. And I think these things we need to explore further, when you talk about guru and vidyarthi, this kind of relationships, how dynamic, how complex they are, if you reduce everything to a learner and a facilitator, that kind of discourse, if you have in the, in our institutions, we are not addressing the correct issues in that way. So as you have rightly identified the problem, we need to collectively think about it, ma'am. It's not, I don't have an answer for this right now, but, I am also with you, getting some of the questions like this,
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Much for asking. But be careful about the kind of language which you are using, the kind of politics which is happening in language teaching and also in general in education. Let us not reduce teacher to a facilitator. Let us not reduce student to a just learner. Let us bring meaning to their life.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Sudhakar, sir, I have a small, it's just an extension of what you were discussing.
Madam.
So this is regarding the whole research around language learning. So when we learn so many theories, we learn and try to apply as teachers, we try to look at the whole teaching learning process through the prism of various theories that we have picked up as a part of our training as language teachers. And I think a few years back, I remember having read an article like, so all these theories fly out of the window when we see some of the latest research in India says that even after students, they go through a school, say 10 to 12 years, so-called English medium schools, students are barely able to speak because we still continue to use in most of the schools this grammar transaction method. And students who have never been to school, and there's some interesting research like in Mumbai, a slum called Dharavi. They've come out with, some researchers have come out with interesting findings that they've never been to any formal school, but children in Dharavi slum, because they're living in a very multicultural kind of space. So all the migrant population go from different states. When they go, they stay there. So a child, an average child, it is believed can juggle anywhere between 3 to 4 languages easily, without any kind of self-consciousness. And they've never been, many of them have never been even to school. So there are these kind of things also, as you were rightly pointing out. So English, how languages are picked up. And we ourselves, we have, we can say, certain contexts and situations which can become very fertile places for us to make these observations. And these kind of multicultural spaces in urban atmospheres, how children, when they are living in that space, how they at early age, they learn to negotiate with their neighbors and with their friends in different languages. So I just wanted to know what are, as a psycholinguist, like how would you look at this situation, sir?
Yes, ma'am. It's a very interesting point which you have mentioned, and the studies which you have mentioned are very, very innovative studies in language. This when you said about that Bombay slum,
yes,
maybe my own explanation or my own narration. Bombay slum, the cultural, political, emotional, whatnot,
yes,
that entire slum as a resource for learning. It has become a resource for learning for children. It is a multilingual space. People coming from different, geographies and living together, that might have created a different kind of multilingual space where, as you said, children negotiate, talk, and converse, whatnot, in different actions that leads to certain kind of mental development.
okay.
Learning a new language, negotiating with a new language, it expands person's cognition. That's what research studies also, some research studies also talk about. Maybe we need to bring such kind of things sometimes into the classroom situation also, such multilingual spaces. But this is a late recognition. People are now realizing that how multilingualism, it itself is very important in language learning. In my university also, they have started a new cell on multilingualism, and long back it was started in Jawaharlal Nehru University, and many linguists and psychologists have contributing there, and I think that's a very important area, madam, you have mentioned, and we need to explore that further and further. This multilingualism and English and language teaching.
I just wanted to know, has anybody theorized on these kind of things, sir? There's
a lot of literature available, madam, now.
Okay.
And this one, suddenly it is not coming to my mind. He was a professor in JNU who retired. He's from Orissa.
Professor Mohanty, A.K. Mohanty, sir?
Professor Ajit Mohanty.
Yeah.
He has wonderful book on multilingualism. It was published 1 year ago, I think. And I think you can contact Professor Ajit Mohanty and also Professor Panda. She is in JNU, and Minati Panda. And some of these people who are working seriously in that area, if you can also interact with them.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
It was a wonderful lecture, sir. And thank you.
Thank you. Kiranmay, madam.
Thank you.
Sir, sir, I'm fortunate enough to be able to present the vote of thanks today. At the beginning, I did not give much introduction to you, sir. I felt the class should be experienced and the learners might have been come to a conclusion that you are a person with a ocean of knowledge. And also you have raised many research questions, sir. Right from the beginning, it is the psychology, you connecting the psychology to the linguistics. And later you have brought the theories of behaviorism from the beginning and to the last, the brain-based learning. And moreover, each and every theory has been given a gist for us and learned, and we refreshed all the theories, sir. And there are many, you have raised the research questions in such a way that it is students now can go to write their thesis, then they can go for the title of their thesis. So this is something, a new beginning for us as an ELT teachers. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for giving your time for us to share your knowledge. Today I felt like once again I have gone to the B.Ed class, sitting in front of you and learning way back 2010. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
In generating the knowledge for the Vignan students too.
Can I leave now?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Very grateful to you.
Thanks, madam.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
And also, I'm very much thankful to the department who has given me this opportunity. Thank you all.